The sun rose slow over Dust Creek, bleeding red across the mesas and turning the desert sand the color of old rust. The town still slept, save for the crows circling the gallows. Their shadows passed over the wooden scaffold where the rope waited, swaying faintly in the morning chill, whispering against the post like a restless ghost. Sheriff Amos Grady stood at the foot of the platform, had pulled low, eyes locked on the noose he'd ordered built with his own hands. He told himself it was justice being served, but his stomach churned like he'd swallowed a fistful of nails. The prisoner was already waiting. Eli Carter stood barefoot on the planks, wrists bound, shirt torn, a patch of dried blood on his collar from the night he was dragged out of his cell. His face looked weathered, but calm, too calm for a man staring down the rope. The town had gathered by the dozens, filling the square. Miners, ranchers, saloon girls, even the preacher. Dust blew between their boots, caught in their eyelashes. Nobody spoke. A dog barked once and was silenced with a boot. The only sound was the creak of wood and the wind, curling like smoke around the gallows steps. Amos mounted the platform. His boots sounded hollow on the boards, every step heavier than the last. "Eli Carter," he said, voice dry as sandpaper. "You been found guilty of murdering Thomas Harlan, son of Rancher Harlan of Red Rock Mesa. Sentence of death by hangin'. You got any last words before the Lord calls you?" Eli turned his eyes toward the horizon. They were gray, like weathered steel. "I didn't kill that boy, Sheriff," he said. "I found him dying. But I reckon you already made up your mind." His voice wasn't bitter, only tired. "There's a red mare that runs at night. You see her, you'll know the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Amos's jaw tightened. "You done?" Eli nodded once. "I am." The preacher began his prayer, voice trembling. Amos didn't listen. His hand hovered near the lever, sweat slicking his palm despite the cold. The town wanted blood. Harlan's men had demanded it. It was his job to keep order, not chase ghosts. And yet, Eli's calm dug under his skin like a splinter. When the rope settled around the prisoner's neck, Amos caught the faintest smile on his face. Not defiance, but something else. Mercy, maybe. Or knowing. He pulled the lever. The trapdoor dropped, and the sound that followed wasn't just a man's fall. It was a snap that split the silence clean in two. The crowd gasped. Someone sobbed. Amos turned away. He couldn't look at the body as it hung there, spinning slow, the boots twisting in the air. The wind rose without warning, a dry howl whipping across the square. Sand stung his face, and the rope moaned as it swung, back and forth, long after it should have stilled. By midday, Dust Creek was quiet again. The sun baked the gallows till the boards hissed. Flies gathered on the beam. Amos sat in his office, hat off, staring at his hands. They were shaking. He poured whiskey, but it burned too sharp to swallow. Outside, he could hear the blacksmith's hammer, the piano from the saloon, the low murmur of life moving on, but something about it all felt wrong. Hollow. He'd done his duty, he told himself. The law didn't bend for tears or superstition. Still, Eli's last words echoed. The red mare that runs at night. As dusk fell, the preacher stopped by to thank him for keeping order. Amos nodded, though the praise felt like a noose tightening. The preacher said he'd buried Eli behind the chapel, simple pine box, unmarked grave. Amos thought that fitting. Men who stirred trouble didn't deserve stone or sermon. Yet when the old man left, Amos caught himself looking toward the window, half expecting to see something out there beyond the street, something moving where there shouldn't be anything at all. The evening came with a dry wind that rattled every shutter in town. The gallows stood black against the orange horizon, a lonely cross on a dying plain. Amos told himself he wouldn't look, that he'd stay in the office and drink until his mind stopped whispering, but his feet carried him outside anyway. He walked slow through the main street. The town was empty now. Lamps flickered in windows. Dogs whined from behind fences. A door slammed somewhere far off. The world felt like it was holding its breath. When he reached the gallows, the wind died. The stillness was thick, suffocating. The rope hung limp, pale against the dark wood. Amos let out the breath he'd been holding and almost laughed at himself. "You're getting soft," he muttered. He turned to go. Then the rope moved. It started slow, a twitch, a sway, then a long, deliberate swing, creaking as it went. Amos froze. There wasn't a gust strong enough to move it. The air was dead calm. His heart hammered, and he took a step closer, eyes fixed on that rope swaying side to side. It moved like something invisible still hung from it. The beam groaned, and for a heartbeat, Amos thought he saw a shadow fall where none should have been, long, thin, like a man's legs twisting in the air. He stumbled back. Hell! His voice cracked. The rope stopped swinging as suddenly as it had started. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Amos stood there for a long time, staring, until the cold bit through his coat. When he finally walked back to his office, the whiskey bottle was empty, though he couldn't remember drinking it. He didn't sleep that night. When he closed his eyes, he saw Eli standing under the noose, the red sunrise behind him, dust swirling at his feet. In the dream, Eli didn't speak. He just looked at him, steady, sorrowful, forgiving in a way that burned worse than hatred. Then the rope began to creak again, louder, louder, until it sounded like the whole town was swinging. Amos woke gasping, the echo still ringing in his ears. At dawn, he stepped outside to clear his head. The air was cool, the streets washed pale by the first light. The gallows stood quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But as he approached, he saw something that made his throat tighten. The noose was frayed at the end, fibers twisted as though someone had pulled against it in the night. He ran a hand over the rope, feeling the rough hemp bite into his skin. It was dry, untouched by dew. He stared at it for a long while, jaw clenched. Maybe the wind had done it, he thought. Maybe boys playing a prank. Yet the ground below was smooth, undisturbed. By noon, the story was already spreading. Folks said the rope was moving on its own, that you could hear it creak after dark even when there wasn't a whisper of wind. Amos called it nonsense, but he couldn't stop the talk. The saloon girls crossed themselves when they passed the square. The blacksmith refused to shoe any horse near the scaffold. Even old Harlan, whose son had been avenged, looked uneasy when he rode through town. That night, Amos lit a cigar and sat on his porch, rifle leaning by the door. The moon hung over the desert like a polished coin, pale and pitiless. Dust Creek slept. Somewhere out there, a coyote howled. He told himself he'd stay awake, prove there was nothing to fear, that justice didn't haunt the righteous. But the hours crawled slow, the night deepened, and his eyes grew heavy. When the wind shifted, he heard it again, the low groan of wood and the slow rhythm of the rope moving in the dark. The road to Dust Creek shimmered in the afternoon heat, dust lifting off it like smoke from an unseen fire. Clara Devlin rode alone, her black dress fluttering against the saddle, her face set in quiet defiance beneath the brim of her hat. She had buried her husband 3 winters ago, and grief had carved her face into something calm but unyielding. The world had taken everything from her once, and now it had taken Eli Carter, her childhood friend, her last good memory of a time when laughter had still belonged to her. She dismounted outside the sheriff's office, boots crunching the brittle ground. The town was watching her. Men leaned on hitching posts, women paused on porches, their whispers curling in the hot wind. They all knew who she was. They all knew why she'd come. Clara ignored them, pushed open the door, and stepped into the dim office where Amos Grady sat behind his desk, looking like he hadn't slept since the hanging. "Sheriff," she said, voice low but steady. Amos didn't look up right away. His hands were clasped, eyes fixed on the table, as if the grain of the wood might explain what had gone wrong. When he finally met her gaze, there was something haunted there. "Mrs. Devlin," he said, "I reckon I know why you're here." "Then you reckon right." She took off her hat, set it down, and stepped closer. "You hanged the wrong man." He flinched. The court listens to whoever shouts the loudest," she cut in. "Eli Carter wasn't a killer. He couldn't hurt a soul. You knew him as well as I did." Amos's jaw worked, but no sound came. He rubbed his temple, eyes clouded with guilt. "I followed the evidence," he said finally, though the words sounded brittle, like glass ready to break. "What evidence?" she asked, voice trembling now with fury. "The word of Harlan's men? They'd hang a man for looking at him wrong." He sighed, shoulders heavy. The knife had Eli's initials carved in the hilt. The ranch hand swore he saw him near Red Rock that night. "And yet," she whispered, leaning in, "you didn't see it with your own eyes, did you?" Amos looked away. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint creak from the direction of the gallows. Both of them froze. The sound came again, a low, rhythmic groan, like wood bending under weight. The sheriff's hand twitched toward the window, but he didn't move to open it. Clara turned her head slightly, listening. "You hear that?" she asked. He nodded once, throat tight. "It's the wind." "There's no wind," she said softly. "There wasn't last night either. I was here." Amos didn't answer. The air between them thickened with things neither could say. Clara's eyes filled with a slow, quiet pain. "He said something before you pulled that lever, didn't he? Something about a red mare." Amos blinked. "You heard that. I hear what the town don't listen to." She straightened. "That means something, Sheriff. Maybe not to you, but to me it does." That evening, she rode out beyond the edge of town, where the land broke into dry gullies and half-dead sage. The sky burned with the last light of the sun, the kind that makes every rock glow red and every shadow look alive. Somewhere beyond the hills, she could hear the faint hum of crickets, the restless cry of coyotes, and beneath it all, the slow, mournful creak of the ropes swaying back in town. She reached Red Rock Canyon before dark. That was where Thomas Harlan's body had been found. A single bullet wound, throat cut, and no witnesses. The sheriff's men had combed the area for days, but Clara wanted to see it herself. She tethered her horse and crouched by the rocks, where dried blood still stained the dirt. Her eyes scanned the ground carefully. The wind was picking up now, carrying a scent of rain. Something caught the light, a small, silver glint half buried in the sand. She brushed the dust away and lifted it between her fingers. A spur. Not Eli's. His were old brass, worn thin. This one was heavy, polished, etched with an ornate R. She frowned. R for what? R for who? Then she saw the tracks, boot prints, deep and wide, too large for Eli's narrow feet. They led toward the canyon ridge, where wagon ruts faded into stone. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Whoever had done this had ridden heavy, probably armed, confident enough to leave, without covering his trail. She pocketed the spur and mounted her horse again. Night was coming fast, dragging a veil of violet and silver over the land. When she reached town, the lamps were already lit. The gallows loomed like a black cross against the moonlight, and even from the distance she could see it, the rope, swaying slowly, deliberately, back and forth. Two men stood near it, whispering in low, nervous voices. She caught only fragments. Saw it move, no wind at all. Eli Carter's ghost. One spat on the ground, crossed himself, and hurried away. The other followed. Clara dismounted and stood watching, the hair rising on her arms. The noose moved again, creaking faintly. Then it stilled. The next morning, she went back to the sheriff's office. Amos looked worse, eyes sunken, shirt wrinkled, flask on his desk. "You ever get any sleep, Sheriff?" she asked. He shook his head. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. That damned rope. The sound don't leave me." She set the silver spur on his desk. "I found this near Red Rock. You know anyone in town who wears a pair like that?" He picked it up, frowned. "Can't say I do. That's quality work. Maybe a ranch foreman, or—" He stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Or," she pressed. He hesitated. "Jed Rooker's got a pair close to this. Not silver, though. Brass, far as I know." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Your deputy." He met her gaze sharply. "Rooker's been with me 6 years. He's rough, but he ain't stupid enough to." "Maybe he's clever enough to make you think that," she said. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. The silence that followed was long and heavy. The creak of the gallows rope drifted through the open window, faint but distinct. Amos's face went pale. He poured whiskey, hands trembling. "You think it's him?" "I think you hanged an innocent man," she said. "And I think the real killer's still riding free with your badge for cover." He slammed the glass down, the liquid sloshing over his hand. "You don't know what it's like, Clara," he said hoarsely. Every day trying to hold a town like this together, pretending the law still means something, when half the men wear it for a mask. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. Then stop pretending, she said. Start looking. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The storm had rolled in at dusk, thunder growling over the mesas, rain hammering the roof of her lonely ranch house. She sat by the window, oil lamp burning low, eyes tracing the dark horizon. Her heart ached for Eli, his laugh, his stubborn kindness, the way he used to carve horses from scrap wood as a boy. She still had one, sitting on her mantel, its legs uneven, its head tilted like it wanted to run. When the rain slowed, she heard it again, the creak of rope, faint, distant, carried on the wind. She stepped out onto the porch. Lightning flashed, revealing the plains in brief, blinding light. For an instant, she thought she saw something moving near the fence line, a horse. Not hers. Its coat gleamed red even under the stormlight, mane tangled, eyes wild. The storm broke over Dust Creek before dawn, a wall of black cloud rolling down from the mountains and swallowing the stars. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, shaking the windows of the sheriff's office. Amos Grady sat behind his desk, a lamp burning low, its flame shivering in the draft. The silver spur Clara had brought him lay in front of him, gleaming in the flicker. He'd been staring at it for hours, turning it over in his hands, feeling the weight of his own mistake in every ounce of metal. The door burst open, and Clara strode in, soaked to the bone, eyes fierce. "You were right," she said, tossing something onto his desk. It clattered beside the spur, a folded scrap of hide with a burned brand, or with a bar through it. "Found it on the red mare. Your deputy's mark." Amos looked at her, jaw tight. "You sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes," she said, voice trembling with fury and rain. "That horse was at the murder scene. The tracks match. Rooker did it." He stood, pacing the narrow floor. "You're accusing a man who wears my star, Clara." "I'm accusing a man who hides behind it." Lightning flashed, and for a moment the room was white as bone. The sound that followed rattled the lamp and sent a shiver through the window panes. Outside, the gallows stood tall against the dark horizon, the rope moving in the windless night. The sound of it reached them faintly, a groaning, mournful rhythm. Amos turned toward the window, and his voice broke when he spoke. "You hear that again?" Clara's gaze followed his. "Every soul in this town hears it," she whispered. "They just pretend they don't." By morning, Dust Creek felt cursed. The streets were empty, shutters bolted, doors barred. The gallows loomed untouched, yet no one walked the square anymore. At night, even the saloon closed early. They said if you stood there too long, you'd see a shadow drop from the beam, swinging in silence before fading into dust. Amos tried to keep order, but the weight of guilt had settled into his bones. He couldn't meet the eyes of his townsfolk. They whispered when he passed, about Eli, about the rope, about justice twisting in its grave. When Rooker came into the office that afternoon, rain dripping from his hat, Amos felt the air go cold. "Sheriff," Rooker said easily, spurs jingling, "you look like a man who's seen a ghost." Amos studied him carefully, the casual grin, the smell of whiskey, the faint scrape on his boot where the silver spur should have been. "Where were you last night?" Rooker smirked. "Out checking fence lines by the canyon. Storm hit hard out there." "Why?" "Your horse," Amos said. "The red mare. You keep her at the stables." The deputy's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Yeah. Why?" "She's missing." Rooker's grin faded, replaced by something colder. "Maybe you ought to stop listening to that widow's ghost stories." Before Amos could speak, the door swung open again. Clara, holding the broken spur high. "This came off your boot the night you killed Thomas Harlan." Rooker's hand dropped to his gun, but Amos was faster. The Colt was in his grip before he knew he'd drawn it. "Easy," he said, voice low. Rooker's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know what you're stirring, Sheriff. You think this town runs on law. It runs on fear. Always has." He turned and walked out into the rain before Amos could stop him. Clara stepped forward. "You let him go." Amos holstered the gun with shaking hands. "He's still wearing my badge." I need proof before I hang another man." "Then let's find it," she said. They rode out before sunset, the storm crawling across the horizon behind them. The plains stretched endless and silent, broken only by jagged canyons and scattered pines bent by the wind. Clara led the way, following the trail she'd seen before. Hoofprints pressed deep in the mud, leading toward the old Outlaw Pass beyond Red Rock Mesa. By the time they reached the canyon, night had fallen. The moon broke through the clouds, pale and watchful, turning the rock walls silver. They dismounted, tying the horses behind a boulder, and moved on foot. Somewhere in the dark ahead, faint lantern light flickered inside a cave. Clara crouched, heart pounding. "That's him," she whispered. Voices drifted from within, Rooker's drawl and others, low and rough. "Run the herds through before daylight," one said. "Sheriff don't suspect a thing." "Sheriff's done," Rooker replied. "He's got the widow sniffing around, but she'll end up same as Eli if she don't shut her mouth." Clara's breath caught. She felt Amos stiffen beside her. In that instant, she saw the truth sink into him, the full weight of what he'd done, the betrayal under his own roof. "I hanged the wrong man," he whispered, voice hollow. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Then help me make it right." They waited until the men moved deeper into the cave. Amos crept forward, peering through a gap in the rock. He saw crates of stolen cattle brands, sacks of gold dust, rifles marked with government seals. The ring wasn't just rustlers, they were smuggling, murdering anyone who got too close. Eli must have found them out. A floorboard creaked behind them. Amos turned, gun raised, but too late. The muzzle of a rifle glinted inches from Clara's chest. "Well, look who came calling," Rooker drawled, stepping into the light. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. Two little ghosts chasing justice through the mud. Clara's jaw clenched. "Eli didn't kill nobody." "No," Rooker said, cocking his gun, "but he sure found out who did." The world exploded in thunder. Amos fired first, the shot echoing off the canyon walls. Rooker ducked, his bullet slashing sparks off the rock. Clara dove behind a crate as gunfire roared through the cave. The smell of powder filled the air, thick and choking. Amos shouted for her to run, but she stayed low, heart hammering, searching for an opening. A stray bullet struck the lantern, shattering it. The light died, plunging them into near darkness, lit only by flashes of lightning outside. Clara felt the burn of splinters in her arm. Then something hot and sharp grazed her side. Pain flared white. She fell hard, breath knocked out, the world spinning. "Clara!" Amos's voice was somewhere distant, swallowed by thunder and gunfire. She crawled toward the mouth of the cave, blood slicking her fingers. The rain hit her face cold as steel. Behind her, men shouted, Rooker's voice rising above them, furious and afraid. She dragged herself behind a boulder, clutching her side, vision fading. The storm raged, drowning everything. Then, through the roar of wind, came the rhythm of hoofbeats. A horse thundered down the canyon, hoof striking stone. A shot cracked, then another. Someone cried out. When the noise died, the only sound was the rain. A figure dismounted beside her, tall, wrapped in a dark duster, face hidden by the shadow of his hat. He knelt beside her, his voice low and rough as gravel. "You're lucky," he said. "That bullet missed anything that'd end your story." Clara tried to speak, but the pain silenced her. The man tore a strip from his coat and pressed it to her wound. His hands were steady, scarred, practiced. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. He looked toward the cave, where lightning flashed and smoke rose from the chaos left behind. "Someone who knew Eli Carter," he said quietly. "Someone who owes him." Rain fell like iron nails on Dust Creek as night came down, black and roaring. The storm had chased Jonas Creed and the wounded woman for miles, washing the blood from her side and painting his face in streaks of mud and lightning. When the flickering lights of town appeared through the sheets of rain, he whispered to her that she was safe, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The gallows stood tall in the square, half swallowed by the downpour, its rope thrashing like a living thing in the wind. By the time Jonas carried Clara Devlin through the sheriff's door, Amos Grady was waiting with a rifle in his lap and guilt carved deep into his face. He froze when he saw the stranger, a broad-shouldered man with a soldier's eyes and a drifter's coat, soaked and streaked with dust. "She's hurt," Jonas said simply, setting her gently on the cot. Amos crossed the room, heart pounding. "Who the hell are you?" Jonas met his gaze, steady and cold. "Name's Creed. Jonas Creed. I rode with Eli Carter once. Sat in a cell beside him before you sent him to the rope." The words hit harder than any bullet. Amos staggered back a step. You knew him." "I did," Jonas said, pulling off his wet hat. His hair was streaked with gray, his eyes hollow, from long roads and harder years. "Eli told me everything before you hanged him. About Rooker, about the Rust Lynn, the killings, the ledger." Clara stirred, wincing, her voice weak but urgent. "Ledger?" Jonas nodded. "Proof of every man Rooker paid. Every job he covered under your badge. Eli found it. Hid it before they caught him." Amos's hand shook. "Where?" Jonas looked toward the window, where lightning lit the gallows in a flash of blue-white fire. He said he buried it in the one place no one'd look. The chapel. Under the altar. The sheriff's breath hitched. "That church has been boarded up since the cholera year." Jonas's tone was grim. "Then it's time to open it." Thunder rolled over the town, long and low, like the growl of a buried beast. The wind screamed through the cracks, and somewhere outside, the gallows rope snapped against the beam with the sharp crack of a whip. The sound made Clara flinch. "It's moving again," she whispered. Amos stared into the storm, the guilt clawing deeper. "Maybe it's Eli," he said, half to himself. "Maybe he won't stop till it's right." Jonas checked the rounds in his revolver. "Then let's make it right." They rode out together before midnight, 3 figures cutting through the rain and thunder, the lightning chasing their shadows across the plain. The church stood on a low rise beyond the edge of town, its steeple leaning like a tired sentinel, windows shattered, door half rotted. When they dismounted, the air grew strangely still, though the storm hadn't eased. Jonas pushed open the door with his shoulder. The hinges shrieked. Inside, the air smelled of mold and candle wax long dead. The pews were broken, the altar cracked, and in the center of the aisle, moonlight fell through a hole in the roof, pale and cold as a grave. They crossed the threshold, boots echoing. Amos knelt before the altar, prying at the loose boards with his knife. "If it's here," he muttered. Jonas kept watch, revolver drawn. Clara leaned against the pews, pale but resolute, her eyes scanning the shadows. Each flash of lightning carved the room into brief, violent light, every crack in the wood, every cross nailed crooked to the wall. Then Amos stopped. "Got something to—" He pulled up a warped plank, revealing a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, dark with age. When he unwrapped it, the ledger lay inside, water-stained but legible. Names, payments, dates. Everything Rooker ever bought hidden beneath the sheriff's badge. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Eli was telling the truth. Before Amos could speak, a voice echoed from the doorway. It drawled. "And it don't matter one damn bit now." Rooker stepped into the light, hat low, gun drawn. Behind him came 3 men, their faces hidden by scarves, rifles glinting. The lightning flashed behind them like Judgment Day. Jonas raised his revolver. "You picked a bad place to die, deputy." Rooker smiled. "I've been dead a long time, Creed. You just didn't notice." The air snapped as both men fired at once. Jonas's bullet caught one outlaw in the chest, hurling him backward into the pews. Rooker ducked and returned fire. The church exploded with noise and light, gunfire roaring, thunder shaking the walls, shards of wood flying like shrapnel. Clara crawled behind the altar, clutching the ledger tight. Amos shouted for her to stay down, and fired his rifle, splintering him board off the wall. Lightning struck the steeple, the sound deafening. The roof groaned, dust raining down. Jonas moved like a wolf through the chaos, eyes cold, reloading in the flash. He took another man down with a clean shot through the lantern he carried, fire blooming briefly before the rain smothered it. Rooker fired from the doorway, the muzzle flare painting his grin orange. "You think you can stop me, Sheriff? This town's been mine since the day you pinned that badge on." Amos's answer was a gunshot, It tore through Rooker's shoulder, spinning him against the frame. He fell to one knee, snarling, clutching his wound. "You hanged Eli Carter to protect me," he spat. "Now you'll hang for him." Clara stood, blood still seeping through her bandage, and threw the ledger across the room. It struck the floor beside Rooker. "There's your truth," she said. He looked down, saw the pages open, the names glistening in the lantern light, and for the first time, fear cracked through his face. A sudden gust blew through the church, fierce and unnatural. The doors slammed shut. The wind rose into a howl, circling like a living thing. The rope from the gallows outside snapped free, twisting through the broken window, its frayed end writhing like a serpent in the stormlight. Amos dropped his rifle. Dear God! The rope swung once, twice, then lashed forward. It caught Rooker around the throat, tightening with a force no hand controlled. He clawed at it, gasping, eyes bulging as the hemp bit deep into his skin. The others backed away, frozen. No one touched it. "Cut it loose," Clara cried, but Amos couldn't move. He watched, transfixed, as the rope lifted Rooker to his feet, dragging him backward toward the open door. His boots scraped the floor. His breath came in wet gasps, and then silence. The storm roared outside, lightning blinding them. When the thunder faded, Rooker hung in the doorway, the rope taut, his face purple, eyes staring at nothing. The noose swung gently, as if satisfied. Jonas holstered his gun, his voice low. "Looks like the rope found its man." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears mixing with rain. Amos stepped forward slowly, his face gray, hat slipping from his hand. "Eli," he whispered, "it's done." The wind died as suddenly as it had risen. The rope loosened, falling to the ground beside the lifeless body. The storm outside began to break, the rain softening, thunder rolling away into the distance. Jonas picked up the ledger and handed it to Amos. "You'll know what to do with it." Amos stared down at the book, then at the rope lying across the threshold. "I'll clear his name," he said, "if it's the last thing I do." Jonas nodded once. "Then maybe the dead'll finally rest."